Hello, and welcome to Nobody Immune series of Warcraft history, where we discuss the lore of the Warcraft universe and the edited lore that was changed by the World of Warcraft game by Blizzard. Today's episode is about the High Elves and their banishment from the continent of Kalimdor. As most of you are already aware of, the High Elves would be exiled from the Night Elves due to a number of reasons. The most well-known of these reasons is their continuous persistence and pressure to use arcane magic once again. However, less known is the fact that the High Elves attempted a small rebellion, using their arcane magic and powers in a defiant act against the Night Elves' law forbidding the use of arcane magic. The High Elves did not attempt to kill or cause any harm to the Night Elf cousins, but to show that it was not as dangerous or as evil as the Night Elves thought or claimed it to be. The High Elves would use their magic and power together and attempted to show the Night Elves that they had complete and total control over their magic. The fact that they were not seen as equals and were nothing more than second-class citizens also drove a wedge deeper between the two races, as well as continuously being blamed for the actions of Queen Ashara and her highborn followers summoning the demons and destroying their world. Lord Dathramar the Brash became the political leader of the High Elves and their outspoken representative. Dathramar would challenge Malfurion's law again and again throughout the years and would only worsen the already dying relationship between the two races. Dathramar would mock the Druids and stir the High Elves to do the same, and eventually outright animosity erupted between the two classes and the two races. Blizzard would keep all of these things, and has been very consistent with this chapter of Warcraft's history. However, they truly emphasized the persistence and refusal to give up arcane magic over any other reason, as well as exiling the High Elves rather than killing them in open genocide. So here we go. As the centuries passed, the Night Elves' new society grew strong and expanded throughout the budding forest that they came to call Ashenvale. Many of the creatures and species that were abundant before the Great Sundering, such as furbolgs and quillboars, reappeared and flourished in the land. Under the Druids' benevolent leadership, the Night Elves enjoyed an era of unprecedented peace and tranquility under the stars. However, many of the original Highborn survivors grew restless. Like Illidan before them, they fell victim to the withdrawal that came from the loss of their coveted magics. They were tempted to tap the energies of the Well of Eternity and exult in their magical practices. Dathramar, the Brash, outspoken leader of the Highborn, began to mock the Druids publicly, calling them cowards for refusing to wield the magic that he said was theirs by right. Malfurion and the Druids dismissed Dathramar's arguments and warned the Highborn that any use of magic would be punishable by death. In an insolent and ill-fated attempt to convince the Druids to rescind their law, Dathramar and his followers unleashed a terrible magical storm upon Ashenvale. The Druids could not bring themselves to put so many of their kin to death, so they decided to exile the reckless Highborn from their lands. Dathramar and his followers, glad to be rid of their conservative cousins at last, boarded a number of specially crafted ships and set sail upon the seas. Though none of them knew what awaited them beyond the waters of the raging maelstrom, they were eager to establish their own homeland, where they could practice their coveted magics with impunity. The Highborn, or Quelldori, as Ashara had named them in ages past, would eventually set shore upon the eastern land men would call Lordaeron. They planned to build their own magical kingdom, Quel'Thalas, and reject the Night Elves' precepts of moon worship and nocturnal activity. Forever after, they would embrace the sun and be known only as the High Elves. That passage can be found in the History of Warcraft, Chapter 1, under Exile of the High Elves, and it occurred approximately 7,300 years prior to the opening of the Dark Portal. This next passage can be found in the Warcraft RPG, page 22 through 23, under Seclusion of the Night Elves. In the aftermath of the Burning Legion's first assault on the world of Azeroth, the surviving Caldori on Mount Hyjal vowed never again to tamper with arcane magic. They set to about building a new empire, one at peace with the world and nature. Over the next several thousand years, the Caldori became masters of manipulating the gentler and more divine magic of nature. Yet, some Highborn who survived the Sundering still felt that arcane magic was not inherently dangerous if used with proper control and moderation. Like Illidan before them, they fell victim to the withdrawal from the loss of their coveted magics. They were tempted once more to tap the energies of the Well of Eternity. Malfurion and the Druids warned the Highborn that any use of arcane magic would be punishable by death. In turn, the Highborn unleashed a terrible magical storm of an ill-fated attempt to convince the Druids to rescind their law. Unable to bring themselves to slaughter so many of their kin, the Druids instead exiled the reckless Highborn from their lands. The Highborn, or Queldori, as Ashara had named them in ages past, were glad to be rid of their conservative cousins. Though none knew what awaited them, they eagerly boarded ships and braved the waters of the Maelstrom. As the Queldori departed, the Caldori wove a powerful Druidic spell to close their borders within an eternal mist. There, they remained for thousands of years, hidden by the mist and by the swirling seas of the Maelstrom, untouched by time and creatures of the waking world. This final passage can be found in the Warcraft 3 manual, under Night Elves, the Sentinels, Night Elf History, Exile of the High Elves. As the centuries passed, the Night Elves' new society grew strong and expanded throughout the budding forest that they came to call Ashenvale. Many of the creatures and species that were abundant before the Great Sundering, such as furbolgs and quillboars, reappeared and flourished in the land. Under the Druids' benevolent leadership, the Night Elves enjoyed an era of unprecedented peace and tranquility under the stars. However, many of the original Highborn survivors grew restless. Like Illidan before them, they fell victim to the withdrawal that came from the loss of their coveted magics. They were tempted once again to tap the energies of the Well of Eternity and exult in their magical practices. Dathramar, the brash, outspoken leader of the Highborn, began to mock the Druids publicly, calling them cowards for refusing to wield the magic that was theirs by right. Furion and the Druids chaffed of Dathramar's arguments and warned the Highborn that any use of magic would be punishable by death. In their insolence, Dathramar and his followers unleashed a terrible magical storm upon Ashenvale in an ill-fated attempt to convince the Druids to rescind their law. The Druids, unable to bring themselves to slaughter so many of their kin, decided to exile the reckless Highborn from their lands. Dathramar and his followers, glad to be rid of their conservative cousins at last, boarded a number of specially crafted ships and set sail upon the seas. Though none of them knew what awaited them beyond the waters of the raging Maelstrom, they were eager to establish their own homeland, where they could practice their coveted magics with impunity. The Highborn, or Queldori, as Ashara had named them in ages past, would eventually set shore upon the eastern land men would call Lordaeron. They planned to build their own magical kingdom, Quel'Thalas, and reject the Night Elves' precepts of moon worship and nocturnal activity. Forever after, they would be known only as the High Elves. As we can see, the history of the High Elves and their struggles against the Night Elves has been very consistent from Warcraft's original history to its continuation in World Warcraft, and somewhat even expanded upon. The High Elves and Night Elf relationship would develop into one of the bitterest and most resentful relationships between any of the races, and outright disdain for the other would result in thousands of years to come. However, despite this, neither race truly desired or advocated for open warfare between each other, but rather agreed upon separation and segregation between the two races. High Elf custom and cultures would quickly evolve and expand rapidly throughout the years following this exile, and they would end up becoming one of the most prosperous and powerful kingdoms all throughout Warcraft's universe. The High Elves would influence many other cultures and customs, and would have a tremendous impact on the human and dwarf kingdoms, as well as the forest troll tribes and empire. There is a lot of details and information regarding the High Elves, their ultimate impact in the world, as well as their society and customs. However, I will be covering more of those topics in other videos that pertain to those subjects specifically. Ultimately, this remains to be a very consistent chapter in Warcraft's history, and a very important one at that. The War of the Ancients trilogy account by Richard A. Knack makes no mention to this chapter, leaving us only with the sources that virtually give the same account, albeit with some more details regarding things here or there. However, this exile would play a huge role in the development of future kingdoms, and would have a tremendous impact in the future of the entire world. Because of this, the High Elves would eventually expel the Forest Troll tribes from the Eversong Woods, find the kingdom of Quell Thalos, and create the Sunwell, which would ultimately be corrupted during Prince Arthas' attack on Silvermoon City. They would also create the Order of Tiras Fallen, also known as the Order of Tirisfal, and create the Guardians to fight the remaining demons in the world. They would teach the humans how to wield and use arcane magic, and eventually be nearly wiped out from the Scourge. The few remaining High Elves would be persecuted and become second-class citizens once again, this time within the Alliance, who took advantage of the fact that they had lost their homeland, as well as the fact that their hierarchy of power had been significantly weakened during the attack by Prince Arthas and his Scourge. Thousands would later follow their prince, Kael'thas Sunstrider, and join forces with Illidan in an attempt to flee from the human forces and take revenge upon the Scourge. These High Elves would later be known as the Sin'dorei, or Blood Elves, and would be trained by Illidan and his demon hunter followers how to absorb demonic fell energy to feed their thirst and hunger for arcane power and magic. The Demon Hunters would also train the Blood Elves how to combine the use of arcane and fell energy together, and how to use it in melee combat. The Blood Elves would be trained in how to wield and use new weapons and in a new fighting style, becoming very sadistic, bloodthirsty, and cruel warriors. However, a significant portion of the High Elves remained loyal to the Alliance and stayed with the humans, hoping to prove their loyalty and worth, despite the fact that so many of their kin had become the Blood Elves, followers of Illidan Stormrage, and users of demonic magic. But as far as the exile itself, the High Elves and Night Elves came very close to open conflict after the stunt the High Elves pulled by summoning their arcane storm over the forests of Ashenvale. But the Night Elves knew that with their comrades and forest allies, the High Elves would all but be slaughtered, and rather than kill the thousands upon thousands of High Elves, they opted for complete and total expulsion, showing them their mercy. The High Elves happily agreed to this, and left without a second thought, and after many long and tedious years, the High Elves would finally find the homeland they so desperately sought after and looked for. So that concludes the Exile of the High Elves. Thank you for watching today's episode. If you want to see more episodes and comparisons, please subscribe to my channel and like this video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to message me. Also, don't forget about our Facebook page that is up and running. The link to that is in the About box. Until next time, I will see you on the next episode.